Hello and welcome to another tutorial, everybody. Today I am going to be going over the very first class that I ever learned, the Concentration Sentinel. So in today's guide, I'm going to be following my standard format that I like to use for my guides. So we're going to be talking about the user interface and layout that I use, some stuff about how you can customize your own, gearing and stats, utilities. We'll talk about the actual rotation itself, and then we'll go into some tips on how to use the rotation, keep your damage up, and then we'll look at the defensive abilities, not that there's too many, and we'll go into some examples as well as some stuff about StarParse, which we'll keep pretty short. So let's just get into the user interface now. So this is the user interface I'm using. You know, everybody's going to want to do little tweaks to theirs. It's really your choice what you choose to do. The general idea, what I've got set up here, and this is how I've set up all my DPS characters. I've got my companions to the bottom left. I've got my mini map over to the right. This top left area here is just a collection of functional things. So I've got my class buffs there. I've got my, self-heal energy regen. You build stacks of centering if you take the utility. We'll talk about that later. And then, yeah, med packs, adrenals, stims, quick travel button, stun break. And then here I've got the relic that I use when I want to increase my alacrity and level 70 content. My primary rotation is set up on the bar. When I first started playing this class, I did not use any hotkeys, so it's been set up in a very click-friendly way, which we'll talk about later in the rotation. I've got another bar down here which has my defensives and a few other useful things in combat that I like to keep there. And then on the far right is kind of just a general utility, quality of life kind of thing. So if we go into the little, let's lock my user interface. That's always a good idea. Let's go into our open interface editor. You can either use this plus symbol here or you can press escape, bring up the menu interface editor. So again, system messages, I always say this one, bring it somewhere in your screen that's going to be pretty easy to see. Make sure that you change the scale as max as possible. These are the red text messages. You want to make sure you see them. I've got my ops frames here, and just off the screen, you can't see them, but I've got all my group frames a little further left. They're also on the left side. We've got temporary ability bar. We've got our cast bar right here. We've got our combat state. And then we've got all of our debuffs. So our debuffs are pretty much right under our feet. They've been scaled up a little bit. They're easier to see. And then player buffs, they are automatic where they show up. Oh, sorry, no, there they are. Found them. They're over here. I moved them off to the side because on this class, there's really not buffs that you need to keep track of or follow too much, so it's not very important. Target cast bar, I moved up a bit just because the target's buff and debuff tray is automatic. So I moved it up. And of course, I do have target of target enabled, partially from being used to being a tank, but also just good to know, like when you want to use your threat drop. You know, if you see the enemies looking at you, you wait until the tank taunt and then you use your threat drop. Little things like that. So yeah, you're welcome to customize it as much as you want. There is a global scale. You can scale individual things. You can move them around depending on where you want your quick bars, how you want them. That is the generals of my layout. All right, let's get into gearing and stats then. So gearing and stats, pretty straightforward. Right now, there's only one set that you really want to use, Descent of the Fearless. Everything else is inferior to this set in terms of damage dealt. The main reason why is because you basically get free 10% damage buff. So when you look at the 4-piece bonus, whenever you gain or use a Force Clarity ability, charge while in combat, your damage is increased by 10% for 10 seconds. Now, it's important to note that gaining the charge also gives you the 10% damage buff, not just using it. So when we look at the 6-piece bonus, you have a 10% chance to build a Force Clarity when you deal damage. It can occur only once every 5 seconds. While between using your charges and gaining them with the 6-piece, you're pretty much 100% uptime. Not quite always, but very close. In terms of right now, I've got a level 70 set bonus on, so you'll notice. This is mostly level 75. This is a level 75 set with a level 70 relic. So what I've got on right now, we've got about 3,500 critical because I'm a believe I'm accounting for the alacrity perk of the guild. So I don't know if it's active right now. You'll notice my accuracy is actually pretty low. That's because I use a stim to boost up my accuracy. So this is the stim you want to be using, unless you're really lazy and forget to use stims or too poor to use them. Then you could use a different stim, or you can use the stim and still have the 1590 accuracy, but when you use the stim, it puts you over by quite a bit. So that's ideally, though, you want to use the stim and you want to have less accuracy, as you just saw there. So now we're at 1591. Perfect, because you want to be 1590 as close as you can get without being under. Notice that temporarily boosted my critical chance as well there. So Shtek is going to be our top left. They're kind of the best balance for 70 and 75. And then if we look at my inventory, you'll see I carry a couple of relics for level 75 content. So this is going to be Serendipitous Assault and Focused Retribution if you're in 75 content, and then in 70 content we're using Primeval Fate Sealer and Devastating Vengeance. I also do have a couple other things. I've got another Alacrity Augment. I think around with Alacrity a lot. I do have... Weird. I do have a couple of items here as well. So I've got a Shitek Alacrity piece for the ear and an implant, and the reason why I have those there is for when the guild perk isn't active. So if we go under Force, you can see that I'm at 9.12%. My skills and buffs is plus 5%. That means the guild perk is active. I have more than enough Alacrity. So we're aiming for about 8% generally is what I like to aim for Alacrity, to make sure you have enough to combat some server lag issues. Moving on into the utilities section now. We're going to go through all the different utilities. On the right side, I do have an example of the general utility layout that I like to roll with. I know a lot of people like to come here and just watch the 5 seconds rather than the whole thing, but for the rest of you, I'm going to go through some other options for utilities, but first we're going to go through all the utilities in a bit of detail. So increase the damage dealt by Rebuke by 15% and increase the duration. So basically, Rebuke is a main defensive you'll use a lot if you're taking damage, and it's just nice. Make it a little longer, which is not the main point, but just to deal the extra damage back is really nice. And that counts when you're taking AoE damage. Doesn't matter what damage you're taking. Adamant, you generate 4 focus while stunned, immobilized, put sleep, so on. And your stun break is reduced by 30 seconds. Very rare you'll ever need to take this for PvE. Trailblazer, Cyclone Slash deals 25% more damage. This is your AoE spam. This one is worth taking if you know you're going to be doing a lot of AoE spam. Otherwise, it's not really that good. You rarely ever use Cyclone Slash. Blade Barrage immobilizes. This appears to be a PvP focused ability. Stoic increases damage reduction by 2% and you build 2 centering when attacked. The centering building effect cannot occur more than once every 1.5 seconds. You don't technically need this for the centering. The rotation does work that, you have enough centering, but it just makes it a bit easier. It gives you a little bit of buffer for mistakes to have that extra centering built if you're being attacked, which, in a boss fight, you'll rarely get benefit from that, but you do get the 2% damage reduction, so I like taking it just for the damage reduction. Rebuke, whenever Rebuke's activated, it generates 1 focus when you're attacked. I don't really like this one. I don't find it's very useful at all. I would assume this is a PvP focused ability. It seems like it'd be quite good for PvP anyways. Incisor, Force Sleep, Force Melt, blah blah blah. Ensnare the target, again, PvP related. Defensive roll, I quite like this one. You don't need it for all fights, but it's very, very good, especially against bosses. And in some fights, this is absolutely mandatory. Reduce area of effect damage by 30%, and you increase internal elemental damage reduction by 3%. I just always keep that one on, and usually the Rebuke one is the one I switch out with Trailblazer. Masterful. Watchguard, reduces cooldown of Pacify, increases range. Cooldown Force Kick is reduced by 2 seconds, and Rebuke can be used while stunned. So, mostly a PvP focused one. You don't really need the 2-second reduction on your Interrupt, but you can take it if you want once in a while. Force Fade, increase movement speed by 15% and movement speed bonus of Force Camouflage by 20%. Additionally, Force Camouflage lasts longer. Great little speed boost utility. It's mostly meant for PvP, but sometimes I take it in PvE situations, especially when I just want to be fast. A door. Transcendence no longer requires or consumes centering, but will go on cooldown for 30 seconds when active. This is fucking amazing. Just take it. Use Transcendence a lot. It's so nice to not have it be linked to your centering, because your centering is needed for your Zen in the rotation. Reduce cooldown for stasis. I never take it for PvE. Raining Reach, increase the range of leg slash. Additionally, blah blah blah. Again, this one is more of a PvP one. I never take it. Expunging Camouflage. This makes your force camouflage a self-cleanse. I quite often have this one active just for the hell of it, but you really only need it for specific boss fights. Enduring. I love this one. I always take it. Increase the duration of guarded by the force by 2 seconds and reduces the cooldown by 30 seconds. This defensive is fucking amazing, so I just always take that. Jedi Promulgate. Each use of Strike, Zealous Strike, and Leg Slash reduces active cooldown and rebuke by 3 seconds. Not very good in PvE. I wouldn't suggest taking it. You can if you want, but realistically, we should not be using Strike in our rotation. Zealous Strike does not get used very often in the rotation, and Leg Slash should also not be getting used in the rotation. So in general, Zealous Strike, which is only used every like 15 seconds or something, I think it's maybe even longer than 15 seconds. So at the end of the day, you're going to shave like max 6 seconds off of your rebuke cooldown. I don't think it's worth it. Heroic. Now we actually have to start making some real hard choices. So when Transcendence is applied or refreshed, it grants purges movement impairing effects, and it grants a movement speed bonus. I love taking this. It's a quality of life thing. There's maybe the odd fight where you need it to cleanse the movement impairing effects, but those are very few and far between. But it's such a nice quality of life thing that I almost always have it active. Contemplation. Reduces cooldown of awe. That's not super important, but you build up to 30 stacks of centering over the course of your self-heal, introspection. So this is really nice. I really like this. Makes it easy to prep for a fight. You're going to crouch down. You're going to do your introspection at the beginning. You're going to build your stacks of centering until you get 30, and then Zen's ready to use at the start of the fight. You have to take this if you want to do this. You could use Valorious Call, but that's a 2.5 minute cooldown. It's not going to always be up for every single fight. And starting a fight with Zen is such a big boost that I just, I always take this one. It's very rare that I try and get away without it. Cut Loose. Blade Blitz can be used while immobilized, purges movement impairing effects when activated, and deals 50% more damage, and its cooldown is reduced. So we've got a 45-second cooldown. We can bring it to 35. You do get immunity while you're blitzing for that second and a bit. This one is not one that I take very often on this class. I don't find that it's really worth it, but there could be some scenarios where you want it outside of PvP. Zealous Ward. Activating Saber Ward grants immunity to stun, sleep, lift, and incapacitating effects for 6 seconds. And getting attacked while Saber Ward is active heals you for 3% of your health. Usually, I just don't find that I want to give up anything else to take this one. I don't feel like it's quite good enough to give up. It's something that's, pretty good for PvP on certain occasions. But overall PvE, this one just seems to be kind of lower on my priority list, but it is one that you could consider taking. Inspired Focus. Inspiration generates 12 focus when activated, and you heal for 1% of your maximum health whenever you activate an ability that consumes focus. So this is really nice that you get the self-heal. It's really nice that when you use your raid buff, you gain focus, because usually you need to use Zen to gain your focus recharge. So basically, if you take Inspired Focus, you can use your class buff instead of Zen, and you don't screw up. You don't have to use Valorious Call. It makes it a lot easier to use your class buff. And that self-healing can be really nice. So that's something that I would consider taking sometimes. It just really depends on if you're willing to give up some of the quality of life stuff, such as Fleet-Footed, and when we get into Intercessor. Zealous Judgment. Dispatch refunds 2 focus when used on a target affected by your Pacify. Not useful for PvE. Additionally, activating Pacify grants Zealous Judgment, reducing the damage you take from force and tech attacks for 6 seconds. So this is where it becomes useful for PvE. You get a very strong defensive by throwing out your Pacify. So that would be the only reason why I'd take it in PvE, is if you need that really strong 75% damage reduction against force and tech attacks. It's a very strong defensive. Hidden advances. While force camouflage is active, you gain a charge of hidden advances every half a second. Each charge increases the damage dealt by your next melee attack by 4%, stacks up to 12 charges and lasts up to 6 seconds. There are times where I've taken this just to get that tiny little bit of extra damage while doing my threat drop. It's not a great ability for bosses in PvE because it's not very long that you'll have force camouflage active, because you generally just use it and then go straight into your next attack because you're just worried about getting the threat drop or the self cleanse. But it's a small damage boost. You can consider taking it when you don't feel like anything else is that critical. So now we come to Intercessor, my love-hate relationship. Force Sleep gets an additional charge. I absolutely love this ability. I always want to have it active, and it's not always worth having active, but I keep it active as much as possible just because it makes the class so fun to play, and I really have a hard time getting rid of it. But again, for boss fights, it's pretty much never necessary to have that second charge. So you can always take it away, but I just leave it on because I hate changing utilities too often and forgetting to change them, this, that. So there we go. That is the general. Now let's go into the next. All right, so here is an example of a different build that you can use for utilities, and this is my speed build. This is whenever I want to be able to run extra fast for any reason, whether that be battery running in Duxton against the last boss, or just in general, I want that extra movement speed. Okay, so we are going to be going over the rotation now. So this is the rotation that I'm set up to use. The reason why I've got it set up this way is because it worked well with my clicking interface layout. And I will show you after this one how you should modify it slightly if you aren't needing the compact clicking space that I've set up and you know you're going to do it by hotkeys. We're just going to swap two abilities, that's all. So what I've got here is generally right before starting combat, you're going to be using your introspection to gain your stacks of centering. As you can see, I'm building my centering stacks here, and once I get to 30, I can use Zen. So as soon as I leap in, I'm going to be using Zen, assuming that I'm using leap to get in. That's most of the fights, is I use force leap, and then I use Zen while I'm force sleeping, so that I have all my energy to start the fight. Now, if you want to use your raid buff right away, you're going to go Zen, Valorious Call into Inspiration, or you took that utility where you don't need to use Zen at the start of the fight. So that's how that's going to go. We've also got our Alacrity Relic that we want to be using as soon as possible as well. So now the actual rotation, there's two blocks in the rotation that you're going to go through. So we're going to start off with our Blade Barrage. The reason why Blade Barrage is good is you can use it right after Zen because it will still build stacks of centering, even though Zen says, oh, you can't use, build stacks of centering right now, but this lets you. And then Focus Burst, this is a very heavy hitting force-based attack. Be very clear on that. It is force, it is not a melee attack. So when we look at using Force Clarity only buffs a direct single target melee attack. Just keep that in mind. But yeah, and then we're going to go into our heaviest hitting ability, Concentrated Slice, which we always want to use Force Clarity right before Concentrated Slice. I prefer using it in a fixed location in the rotation. Just always use it before Concentrated Slice. Don't try and use those extra charges somewhere else. You could potentially miss using them on a Concentrated Slice as a result, so I don't think it's worth it. And then I use a Slash, and Slash can be replaced with Dispatch whenever the enemy is sub 30 health. And then we go into our Zealous Leap, which can fuck you up sometimes, and that's one of the not so fun things on certain bosses about playing this class. And then from there, we are going to go into our Zealous Strike to regain a bunch of force. And then we're going to do Force Exhaustion, and then we get into Block 2. Block 2 is I call it that because we're restarting from the beginning again, and it's almost the exact same. We're going to do our Blade Barrage, Focus Burst, Concentrated Slice after if we have Force Clarity available, which we should, And then we're going to go into a slash. Again, you can use your dispatch instead. Now, one of the important things to note here is you cannot use dispatch for both of these. You'll notice that there's only one dispatch here, because you can only use one of these two slashes as a dispatch, and the other one still has to be a slash. And then we're going to go into our leap again, and now we're going to use our blade storm, which generates the last of the centering stacks we typically need to be able to use our Zen again. And then we repeat with Zen and go through our rotation. So those are the two blocks. As you can see, I've got it set up on my bar down here so that when I do the first block, it's straight left to right. I get all the way to forced exhaustion, and then I come back, start my second block, and whenever dispatch can be used instead of a slash, I've got it right underneath, so I can easily click down, make a little V shape, come back up to Zealous Leap, and then to finish the second block, all I do is I go down to Blade Storm. So I'm coming across, and then boom, down one ability. So, and now you can see Force Clarity. I put it underneath Concentrated Slice to make it in roughly the same area. If you want, you can move it over one so it's underneath Focus Burst, whatever works for you. Or if you just want to hotkey everything and have it memorized, that's great. So that's why I've got it set up this way. That's a nice compact way to use up less space while being a visual clicker on this rotation. You might notice a little bit of a difference in the screen over here now. I have swapped my slash and my Zealous Leap. The reason why this is a better one to use is because this one allows you to better deal with your force clarity stacks. So a lot of times you will have more than one force clarity stack when you go to use it on your concentrated slice. So Zealous Leap does more damage than Slash, so it's a better choice to have that extra force clarity stack hitting Zealous Leap. I couldn't find a nice way to visually lay this all out for clicking, so that's why I don't like using this, because it would just be kind of a mess with trying to put dispatch somewhere and blade storm, and so I was just like, nope, I like the layout I've got. This is one I first learned on anyways, but it's a very simple change. You're definitely welcome to make that small change between those abilities and that order. What you will notice that I haven't talked about yet is this little thing called fix that I put on the bottom. So we've got two abilities there. We've got our slash and our strike. So basically this is whenever you need to fix your rotation, this is how you do it. So anytime you've messed up and you're out of focus or things aren't off cooldown and you want to still keep putting out damage, but you need to fix your rotation, you're just going to do a slash and a strike. You always do those two together. You do a slash, it consumes focus, and it builds stacks of centering, and you do a strike, which grants you focus but does not give you centering stacks. So the reason why that's so important that they're always together is because you need the centering stacks to be able to get back into your Zen, and you also need the energy to just keep doing stuff. So most of the time you just need a single slash and a strike to fix your rotation, but sometimes you might need to do more than one block of this. Maybe you're going to do two blocks, so a slash strike to get fixed up. There are a few other fixes that we can talk about later, but for now, let's just go into actually hitting a dummy with this rotation, and I'll just show you the very basics of how it goes. It's very, very tight on energy management, especially when you're not gaining extra centering or focus from being attacked. So to start, we're going to leap in, we're going to use our Zen, and go straight into all of our abilities. And as you can see, we're just going straight through block 1. Now we're going to be into block 2, and I totally messed up my diagram for block 2. There is no blade barrage again in block 2. And as you can see, our Zen is now off cooldown. I can't believe I messed up that graphic. I spent so much time making... Oh no. It is... Yeah, I messed it up. So, can't believe I spent so much time making this nice graphic and then I screwed it up. So, just take out this ability right on top there. You can't use Blade Barrage twice in this block. Oh, my bad there. Bummer. So just a few little things to suggest is Force Camouflage. If I'm taking that random utility that gains the extra stacks of hidden advances, I'll generally use it right after Focus Burst, so it gives a slight buff to my Concentrated Slice. Again, Force Clarity right before Concentrated Slice. If I was using all of my abilities, which I will show you here, we're going to look at throwing in our Glorious Call with our raid buff inspiration, and I'm going to look at doing my clicking on my Alacrity relic. Now, because I haven't hotkeyed all these, it's very hard to move my mouse this far and click everything while still doing everything. So it's going to be a little clunky, but we'll just give you a general idea of how that works out. So I tend to hover my mouse over here because I've got the rest hotkeyed for the start. So you can see now I've activated my clicky relic, and we've also done our raid buff as well during our opening there. And then generally, you know, if you need to raid threat drop, there would be our threat drop. And we're going back into our fixed and static rotation, which somehow, the timing got a little messed up, probably because of the clicky relic. I was like, that was a little bit odd. My timing was off on the cooldowns. So this is all single target rotation. That's all you're going to be doing the entire fight. One of the things that does make it hard, though, is that target swapping, being able to effectively target swap, minimize your downtime. So if we want to swap to that enemy, we're going to jump over, and we're just going to take off from where we left in the rotation. You're not going to restart. This is an amazing burst class, and you have the ability to immediately go straight into that burst. There is very little damage that you're going to lose by target swapping. Now, I forgot to go over what the tactical was before. Cauterized coronary. Basically, your concentrated slice causes the target to burn. Now, if that target doesn't die, you're still dealing that damage, so it's no DPS loss. This only makes one ability, just adds a dot to it, so it doesn't play off anything else. Same thing with, your set bonus. So we're really doing awesome. There's very little in this rotation and these passives and abilities that make a difference when you target swap. So in general, that's what you're going to want to make sure that you're doing, is you're going to want to make sure that you're doing that target swapping where you just continue on your rotation exactly where you left off. And you're going to find that you do amazing damage, but having that quick mobility and getting back and forth between enemies can be a big challenge. Like sometimes you might be able to blade blitz over to an enemy. The biggest problem, of course, being that you have to know kind of the range limitations of blade blitz, so that because if I'm right here and I'm attacking this guy and I want to blade blitz over here, I'm going to go too far and I'm going to end up over here out of range of the enemy. So as you saw before, when I had myself positioned more little here, now I'm that blade blitz range of 20 meters. I end up within melee range of this guy just on the other side. Of course, having the double force sleep makes a huge difference. So yeah, at the end of the day, to keep your damage competing with other better classes out there or specializations of the Sentinel, you really need to be good at that target swapping to stay on top if you want to be in Nightmare content. But again, we have Transcendence, so people fucking love us for Transcendence. It's amazing. That speed boost. It's a lot of fun, and it just feels so good. And you buff everybody around you with speed boost. So, sometimes you get forgiven for being a little bit on the slightly lower damage size than, say, a Watchman and not providing that raid-wide healing that they provide. So you might have noticed that I changed the ability rotation that's up on the screen. We'll just quickly mention that, and we'll just talk a little bit about what that is. This is kind of the highest damage option that you can go for here. And so it's split into two bigger blocks. I don't like to use this one because I like to have my interface laid out where I don't have to memorize my actual rotation. And this does not play well with setting up an interface where you don't have to memorize it. This is more for people who've got their abilities memorized, the order, and they want to just click them. There's not a lot of difference between the two blocks. Basically, all that happens is Blade Storm and Slash gets moved around. So in the first block, you can see that there's two Blade Storms and that there's one Slash. So second block has two Slashes and one Blade Storm. Other than that, these are identical, and it's not a lot to memorize. It's fairly easy to get into. It provides you with a slightly higher uptime on damage and a slightly more optimal usage of your dispatch as well. So that is the best one if you are looking for the best and you want to use it. The one thing I didn't come prepared for is the AoE rotation. I forgot to include a nice little graphic for that, but basically our AoE rotation is the fixed rotation with just a few very minor tweaks. So one thing that you'll notice after you leap in is that there's a couple abilities that end up glowing. Your Force Sweep, which is your AoE, and your Focus Burst. So basically, your Focus Burst is now going to be replaced by your Force Sweep, and you're going to replace your Slash with a Cyclone Slash. And the rotation is going to be identical. Otherwise, of course, you can also choose Twin Saber Throw. There's different reasons why you want to use these. So you can see Cyclone Slash consumes focus, and it does approximately 6.5 to 7,000 damage. Whereas Saber Throw, which does a lot more damage, but it's in a straight line, and it does not consume focus. So, you've got the two options. Twin Saber Throw sometimes is good, sometimes it's bad because you can't hit as many enemies with it. But one of the biggest things is it doesn't take the focus. And when you take the passive for Cyclone Slash and you add on another 2,000 damage to this, or 2,500, depending on how well it crits. So you're going to be getting yourself up to about 8,500, 9,000 damage, which is not far behind the Twin Saber Throw, and you get that wider arc. Again, it only does a conal of enemies in front of you. It does not hit enemies everywhere. If we pop our Zen here and you look, you can see I still hit the target from that angle. And then if I turn myself a bit more, you can see now I'm still hitting it. That's a pretty good. Turn myself even more, and now I'm missing it. So you can see the kind of, it kind of extends a little bit behind you, almost. It's like, it's a very nice, generous conal. Sadly, though, not a 360. So how does that actually look in practice? So you would start off with your blade barrage, you'd leap in, you do your blade barrage, you do your force sweep, you'd go into your concentrated slice, you do your next filler AoE, you do your zealous leap, zealous strike, force exhaustion, and then repeat again. You would do your force sweep, your concentrated slice, and your Cyclone Slash. Now, as long as there's two targets, this is amazing. There's no downside to doing like this when there's two targets, unlike some other classes that require 3 or 4 enemies for their AoEs to be effective. Now, the other thing you can do, you can spam a little bit.
I don't think so.
So if you're dealing with like 4 enemies or a large group of enemies and it's going to be worth it, you can definitely spam Cyclone Slash instead. So there's the biggest downside of spamming Cyclone Slash is your centering and your energy management might get screwed up, and you might find that you actually run out. But the general idea would be that you're going to want to use Cyclone Slash in place of your Slash, potentially your Zealous Leap, and then definitely your Force Exhaustion. So, and I would even hesitate to say, but Blade Barrage as well. So generally what I end up doing if I want to spam it is let's build up our stacks. So we leap in, we use that, and then we're just going to go straight into our AoE. We're going to do our 5, and then basically I'm just going to spam this a bunch of times, waiting until that's about on cooldown. I can use a leap just to make that buffed again, and then if I need the energy, I can use Zealous Strike, and then... Oh, Zealous Strike did not provide enough energy there. So, as I said, energy management becomes a real big issue. It becomes very hard if you screw around and try and spam your Cyclone Slash in there. Generally, yeah, like, it's just one of those things where it's very hard to pull off. But in the heat of the moment, sometimes you can find that you've got a bunch of extra energy and you can spam a few extra Cyclone Slashes. And this is not something I would ever suggest in a boss fight unless there's going to be downtime following killing those few adds. So basically, you only want to be screwing your energy like that when the fight's going to end really soon, or there's going to be a break where you have absolutely nothing to attack for a while. Okay, so there we go. We just went over our different rotations, the couple of options you have, as well as what the AoE rotation would look like. Alright, so let's go over some of the stuff that we can talk about to maximize damage output. I know we've already covered most of it already, but I just wanted to make sure that we're fully covered off on everything. So again, level 70 content using the Primeval Fate Sealer Relic. I generally like to line that up with something like the raid buff or being in the sub 30 window. but realistically, just spam it whenever it's available. Especially good to spam it during a heavy burn phase if you know that there's going to be one and you want to delay it by 30 seconds or something like that. It's fairly short cooldown at 2 minutes, so yeah. There's also your adrenal to think about. Depending on if you're in level 75 content, you would use a power adrenal, otherwise it's useless, and you'd want to use a critical adrenal. So again, just with maximizing our damage output, we want to make sure that we're doing all those little tricks, like, Valorious Call into your raid buff, using your clicky relic, making sure that you're being very good on your discipline with your rotation. When you do have mistakes, use /strike to get out of it, so that way you're constantly still dealing damage. Now, if you really do bungle up a few things, there's lots of little tricks you can do to try and fix stuff. Generally, the best thing is resuming your rotation where you left off, even if there's like a 5-second gap. It's still better to resume where you left off than starting from the beginning. The only exceptions to that is if everything comes off cooldown because you're already near the end of the block and you're really close to having the whole thing reset, then potentially, as long as your Zen's up, you could just start from the beginning. Now, let's talk about cases where we don't have Zen active. You'll find this happens a lot when you're just going group to group to group. You don't want to take the time, or you don't have the time. So one of the big things to know is that Force Sleep is going to grant us some focus immediately, which is going to be a huge boost. And we also can use our Zealous Leap out of turn, and we can also use Strike. So what that's going to look like is I'm going to leap in. I'm going to start with my Zealous Strike. I'm going to go into my rotation, and I'm going to have to use a Strike to be able to get my energy back up. So we're going to, oops. Apparently I'm pressing the wrong hotkey. We're going to jump in. We're going to use this. We're going to go into our rotation just like normal. I'm good. As you can see, oops, I've still got enough energy here. And now I'm getting low on energy. So that's where I get to come in. I'm going to, again, have to use, So eventually you're going to have to use another strike so that you can get into your force exhaustion. But you can see Zen became available. So typically what I would do there is as soon as Zen becomes available, I would usually use it, rather than trying to look at using another strike in there. It really doesn't matter a lot if your Zen gets a little thrown off, because as long as you're taking some damage, you're going to generate some extra focus, you're going to generate some extra stacks of your centering, and this is not something that you're going to be using, for a prolonged boss fight, so it's not really that important that you have your Zen in the right spot. The reason why Zen usually has to be after Bladestorm is there's a period of time where Zen does not allow you to gain stacks of centering after using it. So that's the important thing. Your Blade Barrage generates a larger stacks of centering than normal, so you don't want to use Zen close to your Bladestorm. But Blade Barrage does generate stacks of centering right after Zen. So that's why we use Zen and then go into a Blade Barrage. So just keep that in mind, but it's not super important. And especially if you're doing content like this where you're jumping from one group to the next, you're going to find that it's very easy to be able to adjust where you're putting your Zen in your rotation and start moving it around until it gets synced up with where you want it. Again, if you run into those problems, you can just do a /strike to get out of that problem until you figured out how to get into the right spot on your rotation. So again, let's just take another look. We're going to jump in, we're going to gain our energy, and now we're just going to look at using our rotation like normal. Damn it. Having to walk to all these enemies sucks. And you can see Zen's already ready again, so I could just pop Zen, and then I could leap. Oh no, yeah, I didn't think I'd done my leap. And we're going to just do our rotation like normal. We're not going to worry about trying to say, oh, look what's available next. And that's just something that I do mostly out of convenience, making it easier to stay on top of your damage. But the damage difference or damage loss is very minimal. We're not in the middle of a boss fight, so it doesn't matter that much. There may be times where you find that it's just easier to skip that concentrated slice and wait until you have a little bit more energy, rather than trying to do a strike / to get into it. In general, just remember your Zealous Strike, when that's off cooldown, you can definitely use it out of order. The nice thing with how this rotation works is the fact that, damn it, it's gonna come off. These enemies die too fast. I can't show you what I was trying to show you. I should be on a dummy to do this. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that your Zealous Strike isn't like exactly off cooldown when you get to it in the rotation. Your rotation is longer than the cooldown of Zealous Strike, so using it out of order, it's not a big deal. It can end up getting reset to a very nice place pretty reasonably fast as you're jumping from one group to the next. Alright, so I want to talk a little bit about the defensive abilities that we have as a sentinel to keep us alive. You really don't have too much complicating what you want to use most of the time, so usually it's quite easy to think about what do I actually want to use. Rebuke is your main one. Rebuke is amazing because as you get attacked, Rebuke's cooldown actually gets decreased. So Rebuke is just so good. You want to use it as much as you can on cooldown, except for scenarios where you're in a boss fight that you want to save that for a specific part of the boss fight. And then moving on to, and Rebuke is all damage. So it's absolutely all damage. It's not your biggest, it's not your strongest defensive, but it mitigates all types of damage, and it does a really good job at being available quite often. So as you can see, that cooldown, it just, right now it's ticking away like normal because I'm not in a fight, but you can see that when I get engaged in that fight, that it ticks down even faster. Or is it a utility that you have to take? I can't remember. Maybe it's a utility. Getting attack reduces the cooldown of Rebuke. Anyways, moving on to Saber Ward. The Saber Ward is melee and ranged defensive, so that's an important thing to note. It does not do anything against internal elemental damage types.
This is too easy.
They have to be melee and ranged attack. So it will work against tech attacks, and I can't remember if it works against force attacks at all. I think those might be excluded. But it's very high damage reduction. So 50% damage reduction, but it also gives you a 25% absorption from force and tech attacks. So that's where you're kind of getting damage reduction from pretty much all attack types, which is quite nice.
And stay down.
And it just is a really good, strong defensive. It's not your strongest, but it lasts 12 seconds. So it's a very strong defensive that has a very large window for how long it lasts. And that's the important thing about it, is how long it lasts. Now, Guarded by the Force is your absolute best God Bubble type of ability. It mitigates a ridiculous amount of damage. The biggest problem with the damage mitigation that comes out of Guarded by the Force is just the very short duration and the long cooldown. So even with the utility that increases duration, it still only lasts 6 seconds. But if you look at a really neat thing here, we're going to pop Guarded by the Force. You're going to see that my... Oh, you're not going to see it. Weird. I thought we were going to see it here. That is very weird. I feel like I am missing some... I feel like they've changed the UI and it's missing something here that I should be seeing. Because... Oh, it just reduces damage taken. I might be thinking of a different ability. So, anyways, so those are your main 3 defensives. And as we were saying, there's that one utility that you can take, and you can have Pacify, granting Zealous Judgment to reduce force and tech attacks by 75%, and that is a great defensive as well.
Let's hunt.
There's Pacify right there, just in case I want to take that utility. And of course, if you have a defensive adrenal, which I don't think I have any defensive adrenals on this character, those can also be used as a defensive by any class. So this brings us to the open world playstyle example. I'm already on CZ198. I'm just doing kind of my daily run through to earn my conquest on this character for the week. So we're just going to go through and we're just going to go around attacking some enemies. And you can just see some examples of kind of the different things that I'm doing here. Generally having that utility that you can leap in twice makes it really amazing. For mobility, getting around, you can notice that I'm popping Zen as soon as it comes up, generally not even waiting. Here I'm going to use Rebuke because I'm starting to get a little bit low on health, as all those guys are hitting me. Great time to use it. Rebuke also gets its duration extended as you get attacked. As you can see, it ended up being a very long duration. So if I had hopped into this next group just a little bit sooner, I would have been able to get that rebuke to cover more. I use my guarded by the force there because I just want to keep rolling. I don't want to be stopped to friggin' heal until I really need to. So class buff is almost all worn off, so we can reapply that. You can use Transcendence to help you run around faster. You can leap while in midair. Use your tab target, get over, take 0 fall damage as a
Clean up this
result.
mess.
It's a very nice little thing. I use my Force Clarity at the wrong time. I use it after instead of before Concentrated Slice. Not a big deal. As you can
Too
see,
easy.
once I'm attacking enemies, I just start doing my rotation right wherever it was. God damn it. Nice stun. Yeah, I'm
And
frozen.
stay down.
These enemies always suck. They're so spread out that it's
Not
hard to
even a
get good
challenge.
AoE without line of sighting them.
Someone
The
clean up
Force
this mess.
Exhaustion is a bit of a dot, so you'll notice that I left that enemy even
This
though
is
he
too
wasn't
easy.
actually dead yet, because I knew the Force Exhaustion would finish him off for me. What do I think about? So obviously when you're fighting a boss and somebody's tanking for you, you're going to want to make sure that you're standing behind the boss on almost every single boss fight. That is the general idea, is that, bosses do extra damage in front of them, but not behind them. There may be certain fights where you have to stand in different places. There are a lot of things about being a melee character that make
And
boss
stay
fights
down.
quite challenging
Not
that
even a
range don't
challenge.
have to deal with, so that you can keep your damage up and not take too much damage. And that's something that I feel like it just comes with a lot of practice and experience, a bit of playing around. Obviously you don't want to become that
Someone clean
melee
up this
DPS
mess.
who says, "Oh, the only way I can deal damage is if I'm standing like under the boss in front of it and I got to take a ton of damage." That's not true in the majority of cases. So most bosses that I fight where there's actually a tank, there are places you can find to stand where you're not taking as much damage. You can find ways to stand, right on the edge of something, or angle yourself in just the right way that you're offset, and you're not taking cleaves from the bosses and stuff like that. So you really want to be thinking about that as a DPS player, about, where am I going to stand? How is that going to impact what kind of damage I'm taking while still being able to put out, all my damage. As you can notice, you can get pretty far. Oops, I should have used my dispatch there. You can get pretty far away from the enemy
And stay
without
down.
actually being out of melee range, because melee range is 4 meters. So
This is
that's
too
something that you always
easy.
want to be thinking about as well,
Not even a challenge.
is how far away from the enemies
Someone
can I
clean up this
stand
mess.
and still do enough damage, or
Not
still
even
be
a
able to attack
challenge.
them, and that will help you a lot with not taking too much damage. Now, we do have this unfortunate thing called Zealous Leap being baked into our rotation. As you notice, it repositions you on that last mini boss there. You saw how I was attacking the boss and I was trying to back up to show you
And
my max
stay
melee
down.
range. And then Zealous Leap comes up in
This
my
is too
rotation, and
easy.
suddenly it's like, fuck, now I'm standing right underneath the boss, which wasn't my intention.
And stay down.
So, I've been pretty lazy about using my AoE in
Not even a
here. You can see the
challenge.
odd time I use it. I almost never use my Cyclone Slash or Twin Saber Throw, just because it's really not necessary. With my companion Shay out right now, these enemies are so weak. I'm just being pretty lazy about how I'm choosing to use stuff. And yeah, you can see pushing it to the extreme on my health bar as well. But that's just the way I like to roll. I like to run fast, kill things, and then just heal up when I'm like, okay, now my health has gotten a little too low. I should,
Someone clean up this mess. And stay down.
So now we might want to use our self-cleanse there. I just used my self-cleanse, forced camouflage, took off all of those nasty little poisonous things that these guys put on you. A lot of people have wondered in here why when they go to
Not
click
even
and
a
deactivate the
challenge.
pipe, it doesn't actually work. And
This
it's
is too
because you're
easy.
poisoned and you're taking damage. So when I click that, I get interrupted by the damage I'm taking. So now I gotta wait for them to wear off because my self-cleanse wasn't off cooldown. But yeah, very mobile playstyle. It's a lot of fun kicking things in the
Someone
ass
clean
with
up
two
this mess.
sabers. I quite enjoy melee, although I also enjoy my
This is
ranged.
too
There are
easy.
definitely some downsides.
Not even a
Oops, I
challenge.
shouldn't have used Zen there. I just used my... Oh well, I won't attack anything for a while, so it doesn't matter. But I shouldn't have used Zen right after Zealous Strike. I should have used some of that focus up and saved Zen for a little bit. But again, it doesn't matter because there's no enemies to kill for a while here. I don't think there's too much else I want to show you. We're going to hop into a flashpoint, and I'll just kind of show you on one of the bosses there what I'm doing. Alright, so we've got a boss here on Kadamimu Veteran Mode. Since I'm the best DPS in the group and there's no tank, I'll be tanking it, so just to give you a decent idea of what's going to go on here. Got a companion out. So yeah, I'm just going to watch my health a little bit. There's not too many spots on this fight where I need to do anything too crazy. But, you know, use a defensive once in a while. Use Transcendence to get to a healing pot if needed. And yeah, that was pretty easy. We had some good DPS there, put out some good numbers. My mobility wasn't quite ideal. Could have done a slightly better job at that. We'll see you in the next boss. Alright, on to the Wookiee fight here. There's nothing too crazy that I wanted to show you, but there's a little bit of AoE in this fight. So who knows, it might end up being something where we can kind of work through the AoE rotation. Not really taking much damage. We do have a healer in the group, even if they aren't. So yeah, so here we are, we're going to see, oops, we're already getting healer aggro though. So you can see, just messing up the rotation a little bit by doing the, whatchamacallit, the Cyclone Slash before the Concentrated Slice, but I ended up just going into a Concentrated Slice after that anyways. Keep the rotation pretty much intact. Alright, so we're preparing for another boss fight. Kadamimu, final boss. Gonna try and build up my stacks of centering, make sure my companion's not pieced before we start this fight. Alright, so Zen's actually already available. I have full stacks. I'm gonna just start. I'm gonna drag him over here with a
You think I'm afraid now?
whatever that was, Twin Saber Throw. So again, it's not like super important when you choose to do your clicky relic at all. Pretty much you can use it whenever, but you should be aiming to use your rebuke 100% uptime, unless you know you actually need to save it for something real specific. Keeping an eye on my health, making sure that we don't get this rocket on top of us. So if I do want to use my raid buff partway through, I'm going to wait until I'm right back to the rotation before I do that combo there. You know, you can use a 10% damage reduction or something by using Transcendence. So you can also do that. As you can see, not the best positioning that I'm doing, but I am moving around a little bit, just be careful in the positioning. Oh good, we don't have to move yet again. Oh, now we do. I'm going to piece my companion, so I would use Transcendence here if I still had it, but it's already been used.
Charge!
And I took him right out of her beautiful AoE attack. Oh well. As you can see, out of energy, so we're just going to pop our Zealous Strike a little bit early, just to help fix with that energy management, and then we're going to use Zen out of order. And now see how it's not ready. We could have used the slash strike, but I knew I had extra energy there, so I just used a couple slashes instead. So there you have it. There's just a few basic examples. Definitely Operation Boss fights can get a lot more complex about learning where you need to stand, how to position. You know, being a melee, there are certain fights where you have to work way harder to keep up those good damage numbers that they expect of you and to make sure that you're not taking too much damage. Of course, something like when you take the utility for Rebuke to deal extra damage back, there may be times where you want to take a little bit of additional damage just for that utility to go off. So we're just going to quickly go into StarParse a little bit. I do have a description on one of my other class guide videos, so you go check out the Gunnery Commando one and see how I talk about StarParse in there and get a decent idea of some of the stuff I might not cover. The general thing that we want to do is, so StarParse, third-party program that helps you play better by looking at your combat logs and making them easier to read. So if I turn on parse, it's going to pick the last active parse that I just did. So that was the flashpoint, and you can see it shows the boss. I can also turn on show all the trash, which would include, for whatever reason, only one boss in this flashpoint shows up as a boss to StarParse. That's fine, but you know, really the others should be in there. So some interesting things that we can see just on the overview tab here is we can see what our damage per second is to see if we're doing good numbers and seeing if we can improve them. So this is a very important thing to keep track of how much damage you're doing to know if you're improving, if you're doing worse. You can see the downtimes where I'm not doing much damage at all. You can see how my damage per second started dropping near the end of the fight, and that was mostly because of all the movement we had to do to get away from the rockets. You can see some other things, heals per second from clicking the healing thingy majigger. Threat, not too worried about that as a DPS character. And then damage taken per second. You want to make sure that it's not too much, except in this case, I'm tanking the boss. So whoop-de-doo, like I'm going to take damage. If you're a healer, you can turn on some other stuff, damage taken per second. Some interesting things here is you can see critical focus, residual power, almost 100% uptime. Centering, don't worry too much about that one, of course. And then heightened power, you can see not all the time. But again, basically that critical focus residual power, pretty much 100% uptime from our set bonus there. So that's really nice to know. And you can see some other things like when did I use Transcendence? When was Rebuke active? Look at how long that was active for. Amazing. You can also just look at certain parts of the fight if you want to get a summary of different parts. Damage tab, this is somewhat useful as well. This is the damage that I dealt to the boss. I can either have it by target type or by abilities. Here I can see, which abilities did, how much damage. I can see the total percentage of damage as the default. So you can see Focus Burst by far is our heaviest hitting ability, doing the most damage. But because it's a force attack, that's why we're not using Force Clarity on it. But Concentrated Slice is the next most. You can see some things about how you're doing damage. You can see things like miss. The thing about misses is because we're using dual sabers, our offhand has a lower chance of hitting. So you're going to see misses pop up with your offhand. Don't worry about it too much, but just be aware of that's why they're popping up. Healing, we're not a healer, we don't care about. Damage taken tab, this can be quite useful. See why you're taking damage, how much. See if it's an attack that you're supposed to be avoiding that you should be getting out of. So certain things you shouldn't take damage from. So if you see them on here, you think, oh man, that was my fault. Healing taken. And then here's combat log. You can say only the stuff that does damage. You can filter it for that. You can have actions also on there as well, so you can see which abilities, when you activated them. You can look at, I want to see when did I get buffs. So, I'm getting some healing from slow release med packs there. I'm getting my Koan ability. I'm getting my centering falling off, Zen, so there's a bunch of different things, buffs given, we're not too worried about that. Simplified is usually what you want on, but sometimes you might choose to take it off. And of course, if you're worried about your damage taken, you can see when are you taking damage, which is more of a tank thing than a DPS class thing. You can change the sources, you can change the targets, stuff like that. You can even filter to say, I just want to see, every time I use Zen or something like that. Or, and then here you can see the different effects. Very important too is raiding. So you can set up join a raid group, be in a raid group, and you can set it up, and other players who join there, you'll see them as well. One of the nice things about the raid is that it brings up overlays on screen, and you can have timers here, and you can set up timers that work with abilities that remind you of certain things to do. You can see your damage, healing, stuff like that. So even if you're not actually in a raid with other players, some people still run StarParse in the raid mode just so they can see these timers. So some classes, to maximize their damage, they've got a timer set up that tells them when something becomes procced or unprocced. But in our situation, not gunnery commando, I'm looking at a commando, so I'm thinking gunnery because the big assault cannon. But yeah, this is a beautiful thing about concentration spec is it's very straightforward burst class. You just go in, you punch things in the face, and you just use abilities. Very static, fixed rotation. Makes it very easy to kind of just do damage. The one thing that is very hard to learn about concentration and takes a lot of time to get used to is just keeping that rotation fixed so you don't screw up your energy management and knowing what things you can do to get out of a problem with your rotation. So, target swapping, how do you do that effectively? Well, usually that's by just picking up where you left off in your rotation. If you make a mistake and you don't attack for a few seconds, usually you just take where you left off. You don't try and reset or whatever. And then, of course, the big thing is when you do notice mistakes and you want to keep doing the most damage, is that slash strike combo. So concentration, I like it because it's a class that, I can be a tank, I can generally play other classes, and every now and again I can just hop on my sentinel. I don't have to think very hard, and I just know how to go boom, 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 things are dying with my dual pink lightsabers. Anyways, it makes me excited. It makes me happy to smash things, especially when you look at some world bosses like Gargath. He's got giant butt cheeks, and you just think, I'm playing the drums on his butts. Uh, Hope you guys enjoyed this guide on Concentration Sentinel. It's a class that is a little bit punishing because the fixed rotation is very fixed, very static, but it's also a class that's very forgiving in the sense that its damage is highly burst. It's very apt for target swapping if you're good at it. You don't lose that damage. It's got pretty decent AoE built in while still doing very high single target damage. It's definitely not going to win awards for its AoE damage, but it's definitely not bad either. They've got a nice set of defensives, they've got a good raid buff, and Transcendence is a friggin' amazing ability to bring into your raid. See you guys in the next one.